January 16th meeting, actually gathering, of the Falmouth Conservation Commission. We have two guests today, Shannon Holtz of Barnstable County, what?
Cape Cod Cooperative Extension.
Cape Cod Cooperative Extension, and Gary Street, our esteemed town building commissioner. And they're gonna explain some new regulations that are coming in on land subject to coastal storm flowage. So, take it away.
All right, thank you, Betsy. And if it's okay with you folks, I'm happy to take questions from anybody as it goes. Is that okay? Okay. All right, so I am Shannon Holst. I'm floodplain specialist with Barnstable County's Cape Cod Cooperative Extension and Hui Sea Grant. Been around for almost 10 years now. So I'm gonna go through some basic outlines of how flood maps work, just to help lay the context for what is coming, and then we'll talk a little bit more about some specifics. So we'll start with flood maps overview. So flood insurance rate maps, that's what the flood maps from FEMA are officially called. So what are they? They delineate the regulatory and non-regulatory floodplains, so the 1% and the 0.2% annual chance floodplain. So on the picture behind at the back of the slide there, the blue is the regulatory floodplain. It's the 1% annual chance. That is what we regulate. So that means that's where flood insurance is required for properties with federally backed mortgage if they're located in the blue areas. It's where floodplain building code provisions apply, and we'll go over those very basically. Where forthcoming DEP, land subject to coastal storm flowage regulations will apply, and where some town bylaws apply. And if you want to adopt additional bylaws at the town level, you can do that as well. These maps incorporate historic storm surge and flood observation, simulated storms and waves. They do not incorporate sea level rise or any changes in storms that we're seeing. So these are all backwards looking maps. So that's important to keep in mind. And that's why some of the regulations that we're going to talk about have been updated the way they have been to incorporate the fact that sea level rise is not included in these maps. The data is collected on the ground at Transects. This tends to be of interest. We're going to look at the maps live for the town of Falmouth, but if you look in the background here, there are some dashed lines. That's where the data is actually collected, and then it's interpolated between those lines. So they're not taking data on the ground everywhere. That is part of why flood maps are imperfect, because data is not collected everywhere. These are created by FEMA and consultants that FEMA hires. They are funded by Congress. Congress is the one to decide whether or not these flood maps, whether FEMA gets enough funding to update flood maps. These flood maps are from 2014. We do not have a date on when we will get new ones. They are, of course, more than 10 years out of date now, but it all depends on funding from Congress. So there's not much we can do for these at the local level. There is some other data. Yeah, go ahead.
Prior to the 2014,
Yep.
Do you remember what the prior one was?
The prior one was 1992. Yep. They are supposed to do it in 5-year increments. It's supposed to be more frequent than that, but it's expensive, so that doesn't happen. We do have other data at the state level now, which is more accurate in that it incorporates sea level rise and uses the same regulatory floodplain that we don't need to go into details of how they figure it out, but it's probabilities. So it's good to use both, but none of what the state has created is regulatory at this point in any way. But it is available if that's of interest. And it is in the town's GIS, it's already incorporated. It's available to be viewed that way. We've also worked with the Cape Cod Commission and created a viewer that's adapted those maps to make them more usable for us here on the Cape. So those are available through the Cape Cod Commission's website as well. Any other questions on those flood map basics? All right. Okay, so there are different types of flood zones. So zone VE, these are the highest risk floodplains. Also, some of these slides were borrowed from DEP and CZM. This is one of them. So velocity zones are areas where we expect to see waves with 3 feet or greater, so really substantial waves that can cause really significant damage. And they incorporate primary frontal dunes as well. AE zones. So these are still areas of often called the 100-year flood, although we try to actually stay away from that. It's the 1% annual chance. It's about probabilities. Just because it happens this year doesn't mean it can't happen for the next 3 years in a row. So the 100 years is a little bit of a misnomer, but it's all the same 1% probability. So we have this new zone called the Moderate Wave Action Zone, or the Coastal A Zone. Unfortunately, DEP and the Wetlands Protection Act use different terminology than FEMA and the building code, so we have two different terms for the same area. So the Moderate Wave Action Area is the same as the Coastal A Zone. So it's the portion of the A Zone where there is a probability of waves that are between 1.5 and 3 feet, so smaller than those 3 feet in the velocity zones, but still significant enough to cause substantial damage. So that's a new zone. We're going to look at that much more closely, but that's a new zone, and it will be regulated in the new building code that becomes effective in July. It's also part of the DEP regulations that are pending. Yeah, go ahead, Vic.
I'm just, and the question is to you. Do we, like we did with the FEMA flood zone, are we gonna have to incorporate this into our regulations? before we
So
apply it?
your regulations hopefully just refer to land subject to coastal storm flowage, and that is defined as the FEMA floodplain, so it's already incorporated
Okay.
that way.
But you can add it to the book of regulations so people know it.
Yep.
Okay, good.
So the limit of moderate wave action, this is a line, the Limwa line, that again we'll look at. That's the delineation between the quote regular A zone and the coastal A zone. That was updated in 2017 and added to the maps, and our coastal zone management program reviewed those. They did not think what FEMA had done was accurate, so they redid them completely. In 2021, our maps were officially, quote, updated with the corrected limit of moderate wave action line. So that has been closely reviewed by the state. And then we have the minimal wave action area, which is just where basically the quote normal A zone, where it's still 1% chance of flooding, but fewer than waves that are lower than 1.5 feet. And then we also have AO zones. AO zones are pretty uncommon, but I believe Falmouth does have a few. These are overwash areas, so typically it's where there's a seawall, and then water can get over it and then can't get back out, or kind of some dune areas where there's overwash. You have a few. They're unusual. We don't have to go into too much detail about those. What's is the question?
Betsy wanted to know if the overwash areas were in Woods Hole.
No, I think they're along Buzzards Bay, but we're gonna look at
I
them.
would think probably
Yeah.
around Black Beach,
Black-
that
and
kind of,
Little
that area.
Island, where it comes overwashes Wright's Beach.
Little
into
Island?
that,
Yeah, that area.
Yeah, we can look at that. And what we're going to look at is the FEMA Map Service Center. So if you want to look at this later on your own, that's the website, msc.fema.gov. And you can just type in an address or just put in Falmouth, Mass, and it'll pull up the map. This is just a graphic depiction of the different flood zones, helps you understand a little bit more the way that they look on the ground. So you've got your V zone, that's the closest to the open water, then your coastal A zone or the moderate wave action zone. So those are the two zones that have waves that can cause damage, and then the regular A zone, and then the X zone, which is the moderate risk floodplain, which we do not regulate. Okay, so this is what the Limwa, or the moderate wave action coastal A zone, looks like on the flood map. So it's that black line with the black triangles on it. So this shows you all the different areas that are on the flood map. So the white lines are the boundaries between different zones. Sometimes they'll be right next to each other, so you can see kind of in the middle at the top there's a V zone at the top and then an A zone on the other side of that white line. So those are the two different flood zones. The Limwa we talked about. Elevations are shown on the map. Those are important for Gary because those are what a lot of the building code requirements are based on. That's called the base flood elevation. It's basically the expected height of flooding. All right.
Question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the boundaries between the AE and DE zone
Yep.
are depicted by the white line, but sometimes aren't they also depicted by the limb line?
Yes, they
And you
are.
can't see the wire line,
Correct.
because the limb wall line's on top of it.
Correct, yep,
Thank
exactly,
you.
yeah.
I
Yep.
thought I was maybe losing it. but-
Nope.
Okay.
That is, and yeah, that's actually, that is a note on this slide as well. So when we get to the map service center from FEMA, you can turn that on and off so that you can see, and I can show you how to do that. It is a bit confusing. In a lot of areas, the LIMWA is the delineation actually between the V zone and the A zone, so there is no coastal A zone or moderate wave action area, even though there is a black triangular line there. So that can get confusing. That's a great point. So before we jump into looking at the flood maps, I just want to give you an idea of what goes along with these different flood zones. So the current floodplain regulations are in a few different places. So the first is the building code. So building codes, of course, dictate how a building is constructed. They dictate materials, minimum elevations, and allowed use of the lowest level below those flood elevations, that's storage, building access, and parking. In A zones, you can have a solid wall foundation with flood vents. No basements are allowed anywhere in the flood zone if it's building new or substantially improved. All utilities have to be elevated to design flood elevations, which is 2 feet above the number that's on the flood map. And that's new. It used to be 1 foot for A zones. Now it's going to be 2 feet for A zones. So then our coastal A zones, so this is what we're really talking about here. This is brand new. Any structure in a coastal A zone has to meet V zone standards. So in the areas where we actually do have those coastal A zones, and it's not just the delineation between the A and the V, they have to meet the V zone standards as well. So that's why I want to look at the flood map so that you can actually see how many structures might be incorporated into that. And then what those V zone standards are, you can only build on pilings, you have to elevate utilities, no structural fill. There are some limited enclosures allowed underneath the structure, but they have to have breakaway walls, and now they have to be 3 feet above that elevation, that flood elevation that's on the flood map, and that's new too. It used to be 2 feet in V zones, now it's going up to 3. And that's what, when I was saying that our state regs are incorporating sea level rise, that's how they're doing it, is they're saying we have to build a foot higher. Anything built new or substantially improved has to be built a foot even higher to incorporate sea level rise risk.
This is
yeah.
a huge change.
Well, it's not really.
Oh, yes,
No,
it
yes,
is.
it is.
It's 1 more foot where you
On
already
pilings?
had.
But this
Oh
is
no, that's what was already required.
For
You-
B zone,
Yes.
not for A zone.
But this is gonna be coastal A zone.
Right, coastal A zone and V zone.
Well,
But
coastal
still-
Limwa.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. This is a huge change.
But the areas that are affected, they're not that big in town.
The thing is we have height limits on buildings as well, so you add another foot. These houses are already
Yeah.
looking like shoe boxes.
Another 3 feet.
Now, yeah, another 3 feet. Now,
It's not another 3 feet.
It is 3 feet.
It's 3 feet.
It went from
It's-
2 to 3.
An
Yeah.
extra
Oh,
foot.
so
It's
another
an
foot.
extra
And that's
foot.
another foot.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
1 extra foot, yeah.
It sounds a little, but it isn't.
Gary's the one who's gonna have to,
He'll get all the screaming.
well, we will too, but.
So with the height restriction, I mean, some towns, so I mentioned that towns can have local bylaws. Some towns look at, I know this is not what your board is responsible for, but towns can decide to regulate the height restriction from the design flood elevation so that they're not penalized by changes to the building code, so that they don't have to be squished down to become strange long shoe boxes. So that is something that the town of Falmouth could consider doing, and several other towns are looking at that as well. Yeah.
Falmouth did, a few several years ago, have a town meeting article to increase the height to
Mhm.
the bridge
Yep.
because of this.
Yep.
I think it was because of the 2014 change,
Yep.
and it didn't pass. People didn't care that the houses were getting squashed.
Huh.
They didn't let the ridge get higher. The ridge is fixed from average existing grade.
Yep.
Flood zone gets higher.
Right.
House
Building
gets
gets squashed.
squishier.
Yeah, I mean, so personally, I think that the right thing to do in most cases is to allow the height to be measured from design flood elevation so that the houses can still look the same. But right, it's, well, do we want them higher or do we want a consistent architectural look? And
Right.
town meeting often struggles to understand that.
Yeah.
One other thing I want to highlight is that in coastal dunes, there are no enclosures allowed underneath the structure. Open piles only, no obstructions and no footings can be in coastal dunes. That's not new, but just want to highlight that. I'm on my town's conservation commission, and we missed that a few times before I joined the board. So I like to highlight that.
That would be for new construction, not for pre-existing.
Correct. New construction, yes. All of this applies to new construction or substantially improved structures. So 50%, if you put 50% or more of the market value into improving a structure or working on a structure, then it has to be brought up to code.
Is it market or assessed?
Either one is acceptable, but it's ideal if the town has a policy of which they would prefer to accept. So the extension and the Cape Cod Commission prepared a set of higher standards bylaws that towns can consider. And one of the things that we recommend is using the assessed value because it's fairer, because some people can afford to get a house appraised, and that is often higher than the assessed value. This way everybody's consistent, but up to towns. Honestly, realistically, what most towns do is accept whatever the applicant wants to provide. If they want to provide an appraisal, that's accepted. If they don't, then assessed is used, or the market value is used if it was just recently sold. So any of those three can be
Is it
used.
just a structure?
It is just the structure, yes. It is not the value of the land. Yep, good question.
What do we
Just
do?
primary structure,
Right.
What do we do here?
assessed
Assessed.
for appraised value.
Okay.
And that is what most towns do.
And isn't it true that if you opt for the appraised value, that becomes the new assessed value for tax purposes? You're talking to a person.
Yeah, you can't use it both ways.
Right.
Right, that's something else that can actually get complicated. Some towns have tried to make that the formal official approach, and the assessor just said it's not that easy, but it should be.
Because
Yeah.
obviously, someone who's motivated to not have to come up with this code
Right,
wants the value of the structure as high as possible and the construction cost as low.
exactly, yeah. A couple other things in the building code: no new construction seaward of high tide, and there are some limited exceptions for historic structures. I've worked primarily, Provincetown has been the town to ping us the most on this because they have so many historic structures in the floodplain, but I know Falmouth does as well. So I've worked with the Cape Cod Commission has a historic preservation specialist, so the two of us work together a lot on, if any historic structures ever come up for you, Gary, we're happy to provide input on that.
We're gonna have that one, Gary, with the yacht club in McCoy, possibly.
In zoning, the town of Falmouth does need to update the floodplain zoning bylaw to be consistent with federal mandatory requirements. But again, that's not your board either. But
Is this planning board?
I don't know who it is in Falmouth.
It's in our wetlands regs.
Zoning, no. Well, right, but there are some. You do have everything in your wetlands regs.
They
We
put
we
it in
have
our
a
wetland reg.
floodplain overlay in our zoning bylaw too.
Okay.
Yeah, there usually is. So this would be in zoning. So it's mostly administrative things, but it's a catch-all for things that don't fit that are in either in the building code or in wetlands. And it's administrative. There's some limited additional regulations beyond what most towns have. One that comes up a lot that nobody had is some restrictions on RVs. Gary, I don't know if zoning is in your purview. We can talk about this at some point of what needs to be added to that. This is not a big lift, but zoning is another place where some floodplain regulations typically exist. There was a state model floodplain bylaw in 2020. I'm working with the state on a pending 2025 update because we've just found some things that can be better about it.
The planning board handles all the zoning bylaws
Okay.
and any modifications to them.
They do, okay, all right. Well, if anyone talks to the planning board at some point, tell them they can bring me in. Happy to talk to them about it.
I'll let the town planner know, I'm sure he'll.
Good.
Yeah,
Great.
I should have
Yeah, and he'd
invited
appreciate,
Jack.
yeah, and he'd appreciate this.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm happy to talk. I typically go through a town's whole bylaw and then pull out everything that needs to be added or removed, whatever it is. Happy to do that. And I will say Falmouth is the only town left on the Cape who hasn't done it, so we should do that. All right, so new state level floodplain regulations. So there are some new things coming. I did already mention the new things in the building code that will become effective. They can be applied now if the applicant wants to, but they don't have to be applied until July 1st. Sorry, this is very small. So DEP, I'm sure you've heard, is proposing regulations or performance standards for land subject to coastal storm flowage. So this is kind of a general description of them. They started working on these in the early 90s. So when they will actually be released, I have absolutely no idea. They took comments on them and are incorporating them at this point. So in general, the boundaries are defined, which is the same as FEMA's floodplains, which we just looked at. It also encourages consulting, what's called the Massachusetts Coastal Flood Risk Model, which is what I mentioned, that the state has additional flood mapping that incorporates sea level rise. That's a different presentation. We can, maybe if we have time, look at that, but mostly just at this point know that it's out there. Throughout land subject to coastal storm flowage, you can't redirect, channelize, or exacerbate floodwaters. Any vegetation must be preserved to the greatest extent possible, and marsh and coastal dune migration has to be allowed. So that has to be incorporated, that if somebody is going to be building some sort of hard structure in the path of wetland or dune migration, that is going to no longer be allowed. Within V zones, so this gets a little bit complicated. DEP is, if they do proceed with these regulations, are saying no new buildings at all in V zones. I will say, actually, Chatham has done this since the early 90s with very little issue. They have been challenged in court, and they won at the state Supreme Court level. So that's been successful, so I expect it will continue to be that way for all of our towns. Within these regs, it says you have to elevate existing buildings if you're substantially improving them 2 feet above base flood elevation. That's already been superseded by the new building code. So it's 3 feet. It won't be 2 feet, but that's what's in these regulations because they started them so long ago that seemed like a good number then.
And that's from the lowest structural number versus
For V
first
zones,
floor.
correct. Yep, exactly. Yep. In A zones, in the moderate wave action area, elevate buildings to 2 feet above current BFE. Again, that's in the regular A zone, that's required by the building code. In the coastal A zone, that's been superseded by the building code. So basically, pay attention to the building code there. There are certain areas called redevelopment areas that are basically already areas that have been built up. In the V zone, you can reconstruct on elevated piles if something's substantially damaged or substantially improved. In that moderate wave action zone, nothing can be more seaward than the previous development. That would apply to V zones as well. You must improve existing conditions, so less impervious surface, more vegetation, and you cannot increase the footprint of the building. So this is all what is in what was proposed by DEP. Again, obviously some of it has already been superseded by the building code, so that's already useless to us, and I have no idea what DEP will release after they've received all the comments or when they will actually release it.
So this is all, you cannot increase the footprint of the building. All land subject to
No,
coastal
that's
storm flow?
specifically in those redevelopment areas. There's a certain definition, and it's for certain areas that are, I don't recall what the percentage is, but it's like if you have a certain part of the parcel or neighborhood that's already developed. I would say don't worry too much about
that
these. Yeah, about any of them at
I
the
thought
moment.
you were saying for like all the land subject to coastal storm flowage, no increase in footprint.
No.
I mean, that's what 90% of our projects are.
Yeah. I will say that so these are what the state has proposed. The Extension and Commission has also created another set of performance standards and bylaws because we knew the state was a little slow. So we have some, and we do recommend saying no more increase in footprint or a very limited increase. So you can increase if they're trying to get the utilities out of the basement and they're filling the basement and the utilities need to go somewhere, you can allow them to increase to put in a bump out. But otherwise, we are saying, or offering it as an option to towns to prohibit increasing the footprint in the floodplain. This is an area we know is a hazardous area and will be exposed to sea level rise, so our approach is let's not put more stuff in an area that we know will have damage. But it's up to the towns what you want to
I
adopt.
mean, philosophically, we agree with that,
Mm-hmm.
but I can't see that this will fly very well in the town.
Yep, and that's up to you. So what we've done is created kind of an a la carte option of regulations that you can pick and choose from, and you don't have to choose those.
But officially, they're not that, no increase in footprint is not official in any entity at this
Correct.
point.
Correct.
DEP could make it official.
DEP could make it
It's just
official.
Probably getting a lot of pushback, and that's why it's taking forever. to
Right,
release.
and same with DEP's proposals for no new buildings in V zones. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so basically, this is what they put out there, but don't worry about it too much. I wanted to mention it because pieces of this could actually end up coming through, but we don't know what will actually come
You
through.
can probably tell who the engineer that represents applicants is in this room versus.
Could have guessed. All right, so what we're gonna
We're
do
happy to
now-
have you, Mike.
Okay, so I want to kind of walk around the Falmouth floodplain and show you what these areas look like. So so the question was before, well, sometimes the line, sometimes the line is, this black line is the delineation between zones. It is right there. Here you can see that this is V zone, this is zone V. Down here it says zone A. But if you go over here to our layers, this is mostly for staff and our engineer. And then you can go down to limit of moderate wave action. You can uncheck that. And then,
That's us.
yeah, then it'll show. That's great when it is the delineation between the two zones. It can mess you up if it's not.
If you're shut off and you don't know you're on a
Exactly,
limb.
exactly, yes. So I'm gonna leave it on for now. So in this area, it doesn't make a difference because it is the line between the V zone and the A zone. So absolutely no difference because of that line. So we'll just move around.
What's that other black line again?
The other black line is the shoreline.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you'll see here that for the most part, so it's still the difference between the V zone and the A zone here, I'm not going to go in this much detail for the whole town, but here's an area where it does make a difference. It's a little hard to see there, but this is A zone. This is A zone with an elevation of 13. This is A zone with an elevation of 12. So this is an area where these houses that are in here were previously in just the A zone. Now they're in the coastal A zone. That means any substantial improvement to these houses or any new construction in this area has to comply with V zone standards. So again, only built on pilings. All the utilities have to be elevated. It's measured from the lowest horizontal structural member instead of the top of the bottom floor. So it's just measured from a different place than it usually is for the A zone. It's the open pilings is really the biggest difference, and the increase in freeboard. So they would have to be, any structure built in this area would have to be built to elevation 16, whereas in this area it would be, because it's a foot lower, base flood elevation is a foot lower, and they only have a 2-foot freeboard for the regular A zone, so they would be building to elevation 14, and this one's 16, because there's a 3-foot freeboard and it's a higher base flood elevation.
Are breakaway panels allowed in those areas?
Breakaway panels are allowed. Yep. Not highly encouraged because they become storm debris, but yes, allowed.
Generally, we don't allow, I mean, not generally, we don't allow
don't
breakaway
You
panels.
don't? Okay.
In V zones.
In V zone.
Yeah, but the coastal A
Well,
zones
as
will
soon
have
as
to
we
be
change this,
You'll have to change your regs.
well, that's what we're working on, that's why you're here today.
coastal,
They're not official yet, is all I'm saying. And I'm not saying I don't agree, I'm just.
Yeah, no, I
agree
know.
with you, but Right now, that doesn't say that.
Yep.
Watch how
So,
quick I could change that, Mike.
so here's another area where we have A zone on this side, A zone on this side. So any structure that is cut in half. So this is clearer on my screen than for you, but if the line goes through the middle, so for example, this house right here, the line goes through the middle, you have to go with the more stringent or higher risk flood zone. So these houses, even though the line goes through the middle of them, they would be considered to be in the coastal A zone with the base flood elevation of 13, not the regular A zone with the base flood elevation of 12. So they would have to comply. Any, great question, yeah. Any portion, even if 1 square inch of the house is cut by a line from a higher flood zone, then it has to comply with the higher one. Yep. So there are a few more areas on this side of town. And you could do, I mean, your GIS folks could do, and this is not a bad idea for your GIS folks to do, is to do a quick analysis of where there are new, quote, coastal A zones or moderate wave action zones. Because, again, the line is often the delineation between the A and the V zone, so it's nothing different. But in some areas, it does create these new zones, so you could have them come up with the acreage that's incorporated into these new zones so that you have a good handle on what's affected. But again, the building code is state level regulation. You have no control over that. Gary has to enforce that. So there's nothing that can be done about that anyway.
So this has been adopted?
It becomes effective July 1st.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
We're running concurrent right now.
Yeah,
Right.
so I mean, it was adopted in January, but it's concurrent with the prior building code until the end of June.
Yep.
Correct. Thank you.
And no one has to build under the new code until July. That's what the concurrent is. So what would you like to do? We can keep looking at areas in town. I can answer more questions about this zone.
Could you show us some in Buzzards Bay?
Yeah.
How about 314 Quistit Ave?
I feel like that's a trap and I shouldn't do that. I don't know. Jen, should I do that? Should
I
look
haven't
up
looked over
314?
there yet.
All right, I'll do it. Outside.
It's looking good, Mike.
But isn't that there's a limb law?
Down below.
There is, but so this is also a good point. The triangles, here I'll zoom in. The triangles point to the direction of the coastal A zone. So they're pointing this way, this way, this way. They're pointing toward the hazard. And here it is, so right here we have V zone and this is X, so it's the delineation between zones.
Just a question about this.
So that white line.
What was, oh, you're right, I didn't see that. Good thing you guys are watching me. Yeah,
Big
you're right.
green spot.
Yep, so that is, what if there were anything to be built there, that would have to comply with the new V-zone standards.
Which would be
Which-
pile-supported breakaway panels.
Pile-supported breakaway elevation 19.
And what about regrading and,
So regrading, so fill in a V-zone, by federal law, you cannot use fill to support a structure or elevate a structure above base flood elevation. So structural fill cannot be used in a V-zone. If you bring in fill to regrade, you can do that. But this is where I would put this on the Conservation Commission. It's your responsibility to say, put it back on the engineer and say, you have to make sure that it is not going to increase flooding to any neighbors.
but that's always a topic of conversation.
It is.
Because we always will say you can't displace the Atlantic Ocean.
Right.
By adding fill.
Right, right.
Or maybe we'll dredge somewhere to compensate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. And yes, there are different some of you land in different places on that. My concern on that is typically when there are a lot of houses in a small area, so there's a lot of density there, then it increases the likelihood that it could cause problems for the neighbors. If it's 3 acres and there's nothing else around, then I'm not gonna be too worried about it.
Some places the natural slope is steeper,
Mhm.
and when you do a redevelopment, you're gonna regrade and make it flatter, so you're
Mhm.
kinda like
Allowing water to go.
softening the impact, because the wave might be able to flow
True,
up
right.
less.
But then you may also be allowing water to go further inland, so,
Right.
yeah. Yeah,
To your neighbor on either side.
right, yep. All right. So there are some other, let's see. Nope, that's not, oh, there's another little one over here is another coastal A zone. It's very small.
Well, what's that white line?
So yeah, so that white line,
No, well, you're going beyond where I was thinking.
well, this white line shows the difference between this A zone
Right,
and this V zone.
yeah.
So you were asking me about, well,
That
FEMA.
one.
Oh, down
in
here?
the bottom corner.
This one? No,
Well,
this
that
one.
but bottom left corner.
Over here. Oh,
Yeah, it
that,
goes all the way across.
yeah, so that is a delineation between 2 different V zones where the base flood elevation is different, so.
Oh, okay, just V zone,
Yeah.
okay.
Yep, just V zone.
Yeah.
So this one's 23, this one's 18,
Yep.
this one's saying much higher wave risk as you're more protected,
Right.
is what it's saying.
But
Here-
there are little pockets here.
Yeah, there are lots of little pockets. So here you've got another one. That's another one that was not previously impacted. They had to be A zone prior. Now they'll have to be V zone standards. Sometimes I will tell you this map sometimes just doesn't load at all. FEMA can get overloaded, so sometimes you have to come back to it later. I'm glad it's working right now. All right. So if we maybe go up this way. So we've got some more here, but this is marsh, so you're not gonna be building there anyway, is my assumption, unless you've got upland there. Same thing here. It is a coastal A zone, but it's marsh.
This section will be interesting.
Right there.
Yeah, so there's a lot going on here. So much going on. I'm having a trouble here. All right, so here I'm going to turn off the Lemois line just to see where our zone delineations are. So we've got A here. This is A as well. So so this is an area where, so this is A zone in here. So this is all coastal A. This is V. This is also V, so this is just the delineation. This is funny when they have these circular ones. So in here is actually the coastal A zone, and out here, but there is a zone break in there. This is quite the flood map. They don't usually look this complicated.
Well, it's a complicated area.
Yep. So same thing over here. We've got another one here.
Yeah.
This side of town in the rain.
This one's mostly wetland, but looks like maybe a little development down there. Over here, another one.
I'd like to see what Wild Harbor, New Silver looks like.
Yeah, keep going up.
Shannon has a hard stop at 4:30, so she can get back to her town to be in her Conservation Commission meeting. So I guess,
So.
That's where you wanted to go.
Mhm.
So it actually doesn't, Hold on, I have a teeny tiny
We
flood
can
zone.
send this link to all of you,
Yep.
so you can
look on
check
our-
it out.
look on our
Yep.
own.
Yeah.
Yep, you can look on your own. I
But-
will say here, I'm just gonna show you real quick, when you pull, when you go to the Map Service Center, oops.
They'll
Yeah.
send us the link.
Right, I'm just gonna show you, they're gonna send you here, so you're gonna have to put in Falmouth, Mass. And then right here, you go to NFHL Viewer. And that'll take you to the map that we were just looking at.
We can send you
Okay, great.
All right.
It's really interesting.
here. Yes, it is.
Good.
We'll have a lot to talk about next month.
Now our
Any,
meetings are gonna go for 3 hours longer.
I already know it.
Thanks so much.
You guys
We don't get
Hey.
guys to do quick jobs.
planning and stewing about a certain thing, I know you will. You're gonna adopt, you're gonna make, like.
Why don't you help us? Tell us what we should be doing.
I think you'll be talking about, you have, you're gonna make the limois are effectively gonna be the same, under the same regulations as your current velocity zone. Meaning, in Falmouth, because of Concom regs, you can't even have breakaway panels, it has to be full
Mhm.
underneath.
We allow for a small enclosure for mudroom, elevator,
Yep.
staircase.
But these areas that we've been pointing out that are not in a V zone, but they're in a limois,
yep,
it stands to reason, because of your philosophy, that you will be making those like V zones. So that might apply.
We
to-
haven't adopted that yet, we haven't
I know,
even
but I'm-
discussed it
He
yet.
already feels in his bones.
I feel it. And
I feel it
And I
coming.
also bet, and it's probably
We're
makes
trying to
sense.
protect the environment, Mike.
I'm just telling you, I'm not arguing, I'm just saying this is probably.
Yeah, yeah.
And you're probably going, and this is fine, apply them to like docks, like in V zones, how you don't want to have docks in V zones. These limois.
hadn't
There
even
we
thought
are.
of
I think
That's
he's
another
giving you
thing.
ideas.
Well, it's common sense if you're gonna keep doing that to
Yeah,
it.
yeah, absolutely.
Because they're subject to wave action.
Put that down. This-
Betsy's making me make, Betsy's whispering notes to me now, Mike.
So with your, you do have your 25-foot setback from V zones, is that correct? Where
Correct.
V zone
Yes.
applies? So one thing that you might want to consider is replacing that with the limois lines, because that has already, the mapping, the engineering, the modeling has already been done with the limois lines. And if I understand what you're trying to accomplish with that setback, then this is a more accurate way to do that than just the straight 25-foot
Right.
setback.
Well, yeah, and I
Yeah.
explained to you why, the rationale, if you go to an X zone,
Right, with the X
This
zone,
is
absolutely.
ridiculous, right?
Right. But here, where the coastal A zone creates coastal A zones,
Right.
it's doing that for you.
yep,
Yeah.
yep.
But there might be some cases where you apply the 25 now, that 25 won't apply because.
There are
it won't
probably
be-
a lot of places, yeah.
So some people might suddenly not be subject to those
Correct.
regulations.
If that's the way you go.
Well, I mean,
Unless
this
you keep
is,
that one in and add this one to it.
this is the most current
It is.
engineered / science approach to it.
Right. So my recommendation is to use this because of all the science behind it.
Yeah.
Unless you have other reasons beyond the potential for additional risk for that 25-foot setback.
Shannon, I had one question. When you were talking about P-Town had a lot of historic buildings and, there's a different way they're kind of looking at things.
Yep.
And Gary knows here in Falmouth, we have the same issue. What do they do? I mean, do they get variances, exceptions, or?
Historic structures are a whole thing unto themselves. There is an exemption to the building code that they don't have to completely comply if full compliance would negate their historic designation. And it only applies to structures that are individually listed on the National Register of Historic Places, listed as contributing to a National Register Historic District, or listed on, I think Falmouth is one of two on the Cape. You have what's called a certified local government, which means that you actually have your own historic designations that the town has created. I think that that's correct that you have that. So it could also be houses that or structures that are on that list, but it only applies to those. It doesn't apply to, oh, it's been here for 50 years, therefore it is historic. So what they can do some different things. It is house by house or structure by structure to see what makes sense within the historic context of that structure itself and the architecture. But so what we look at is what is it that makes that historic, that designates it as historic? Is it the placement of the front door? Is it the style of windows? Is it the dormers? Does it have a slate roof? So it's whatever is listed in the historic designation as making it historic that cannot be altered. If the foundation is not listed as what makes it historic, then it can be elevated. There are, and brought into compliance, but there are aesthetic things that the Historic District Commission can say, well, no, we still want it to look a certain way. Or there could be a whole group of historic structures that maybe they want to make them look a little consistent, or having one way higher than the rest based on weird things going on with the flood zones would just really throw everything off. So there are sometimes considerations made for those things, but it is a case-by-case basis. And it really has to be, the exemption can only apply if it would negate the historic designation of
Yeah,
the
and the reason I asked that, there are so many historic houses that have cut granite foundations, which that's part
Yeah.
of their beauty, is
Right.
their foundations and their beautiful granite steps and that,
Right.
so.
But the other thing to balance with it is the reality that flooding is getting worse. If we leave them in that location, they will get flooded. Then that's also a safety, health and safety risk. So there are things that you can do that get really expensive. Like you can elevate from the inside. You can leave the exterior the same, and you can elevate the first floor. And put in vents underneath. That's an option, but you have to have stairs that go up, so it shrinks the space. But if the exterior of the house or the structure is that important to stay, that is an option to make it safer from flooding, but also stay within that historic character. We did release something called Flood Area Design Guidelines that are available to all of the towns and to applicants and architects, anybody who is designing in these areas and wants to stay within the aesthetic appearance to help with that. So that's a detailed document. All right. Any other quick questions? I have 3 minutes.
This was great.
Good.
Thank you
Thanks.
very much for your time.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Shannon.
No problem. All right. We'll leave you to it.
All
Now we
right,
have
thank
Gary
you,
for an
Shannon.
hour?
Yep, now we have Gary for a few minutes. Gary, I think unfortunately the chairman wasn't able to make it today, and he just wanted to know how you would go about, I guess, implementing this. I mean, I know you and I have had a discussion where they can choose what code to go to build under up until July.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thank you. And you can
June
reach out to
30th.
me with any questions too.
I'll be reaching out to you probably tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I guess he just wants a kind of a sense of how you're going to be implementing the VZO standards in coastal A zones.
Yeah, you've just incorporated more structures that are gonna have to come into compliance in
Yep.
the V zone.
Okay.
So the tear down and rebuilds in V zones are pretty much gonna go away. And it's incorporated a greater area, so.
Okay.
Could you repeat, so
Yeah.
if you're in a V zone currently with just say a house that's not compliant, you tear it down, you can no longer build it back up in that V zone, is that what
That's
the new
what they're
reg's
saying
gonna be?
now.
Yeah, all right, I just wanted to be clear. So that'll change a lot,
What?
a lot of tear downs.
If you're in a V zone and you raise it to the ground, you can't
RAZE.
rebuild. RAZE.
You can't put it back.
You can't put it back.
How many of those do we get?
Those the DEP regs?
That's what she just
No,
told us,
no,
wasn't it?
no.
That's what she just said.
No, that's not what she said.
Well,
Yeah.
that will happen if these DEP regs go through, but they
Yes.
haven't gone through yet.
Well, I asked her that question specifically, that's for new construction. Like, if you do a tear down rebuild, that's not new construction.
That's not new construction.
You have a grandfathered structure, but you would have to tear down and rebuild to the standards. 'cause
Correct.
To the standards and
Which
in
we
that
already
same,
doing, aren't
and
we?
in that same footprint. as
Yes.
currently proposed by DEP. Now, Julie, what she was saying is you cannot, if the DEP regs are adopted, and they are pending, they have not been adopted, you will not be able to new build in a V zone, a new build.
Okay.
They do allow the section for redevelopment, which was the section that says redevelopment in a V zone, you cannot expand the footprint. But again, stress, those are pending, they've gone through public comment, they have not been adopted yet.
I also heard that until July 1st, if you're in a Limois but not a V zone, so you're really in an AE zone that has the Limois in it.
Right.
Until July 1st, you don't have to have, you could apply for a building permit without breakaway panels and things and meet the new standard.
Correct.
Like, as of July 1st, your brand new building wouldn't be in compliance.
Correct.
For some new, if someone buys it 3 years.
I wonder how insurance works like that. Do you know that, Gary? So let's say they were in a coastal A zone and they, like Mike just gave us the example, someone chooses to build under the prior building code. And then July 1st, they're not in compliance with the new building code. How does that affect their insurance?
They're only gonna be covered up to $250,000 anyways under FEMA's insurance.
Okay, all right.
So it would be, it would benefit you and us if we just had a list of all the lots that are in this Limois
Yeah,
zone.
that's a lot.
There's a lot.
Interesting.
If you had a building permit like that was issued today, and you started construction today, and you're in a Limois, but not a V zone, and you build your house, and then like
Tree outside.
go to sell after it's
Don't buy this
built,
lot.
maybe it's a speculative developer, he goes to sell, along comes a buyer, and the buyer's lender wants an elevation certificate. Someone like me would fill out that elevation certificate, and the insurance would be higher because they're right from day one not meeting the current standards, even though they were allowed to because we're in this transitional period. You'd be kind of short-sighted not to meet the new standard, like at this point in time, because pretty soon it's going to change.
Don't rush to do it before July, you might as well just comply because,
Yeah. I mean,
I
so
do know
if
there are
somebody goes to
certain-
you, if somebody goes to you, you could say,
I would say what I just said, and I
Yeah,
would say,
exactly.
talk to your architect about it too.
yeah.
And I do know
I'd say
some
talk
of
to
your
Gary about it.
peers, Mike, are guiding their clients to build to the new code standards.
See, I
You've
can't
heard
force
them.
anybody to do that.
Hmm?
I can't force anybody.
No, I'm
No,
not
no,
saying
I'm
you
saying
can, I'm saying that
Some of the engineers are
Mike's,
saying that.
yeah, some
we've
of
been
the,
recommending. It's just like the
engineers.
IA systems, we've been
Same
recommending it.
thing.
yeah, we've already been talking to them and they're already guiding their clients to build under the new code instead of the old code. Do you have any questions for us, Gary? No? Thank you. Okay. Well, I think that concludes our gathering.
Well,
We can't do
thank
anything
you,
else.
thank you everyone for attending.
It was wonderful.
And this is the conclusion of our
And thank you for your
gathering.
time, all of you.
Yeah.